Before there was sound, before light, before the touch of form upon the void, there was the Orbis, an infinite, unknowable expanse of potential. It was not a place nor a thing, but a dream without dreamers. And within that dream stirred two forces, reflections of one another. Anu, the everything. Padme, the change. They are the first duality, the primal symmetry that gave birth to all that would ever be. Anu was stasis, the still heart of existence, and Padme was motion, the endless surge of transformation. From their interplay, time itself found its first rhythm. From their mingling emerged a light, Anui El, the soul of order, who would come to embody the concept of eternity, and with him came Sithis, the echo of Padme, a shadowed force that would forever define endings, death, and possibility. Between these two, creation began to dream itself into shape. Where Anui El and Sithis met, patterns formed, flickers of thought given weight. These were the Et Arda, the original spirits. Some would become known as gods. Others would scatter into countless forms across the tapestry of existence. Among them was Lorcan, the trickster, the missing god, the catalyst of all mortal suffering and joy. And among them too was Magnus, the architect, who envisioned the first blueprints of reality. They dwelt in the timeless spaces of the Orbis, shaping realms from thought and will. Some of these realms became the planes of oblivion, reflections of their creators' desires and natures. Others remained abstract, unreachable even to the gods themselves. It was in this boundless age that Lorcan conceived a question no other spirit dared to ask. What if the divine could give shape to something more, something finite and something real? The Et Arda gathered, drawn by Lorcan's vision. He spoke of a world where spirit and matter might mingle, where being could be tested against limitation. To many, it was madness. To others, though, it felt like a revelation. Magnus was intrigued. He sketched a design, a vast plane that would become Mundus, the mortal realm. But in its making, the Et Arda found themselves diminished. To give shape to form was to surrender part of their infinite nature. Some withdrew in fear. These became the Daedra, or those who remain, refusing the mortal plane and keeping their full divinity within their own realms. Those who stayed, the Aedra, our ancestors, lent their essence to the creation, becoming bound to the bones of the world. Among them were Akatosh, the dragon of time, Arche, keeper of cycles, Mara, mother of love, and Stendar, the steadfast mercy, and Kinnarath, the breath of the sky. Each poured fragments of their being into the fabric of Mundus, shaping mountains, oceans, and the first breath of air. Yet Lorcan's purpose remained shrouded. Some said he acted from compassion, seeking to bring meaning to existence. Others whispered he desired only to wound the divine, binding them to limitation. When the work was done, the world trembled, radiant and imperfect. And in that moment of awe, Magnus saw the cost. He fled the creation, tearing through the veil of Aetherius, leaving behind a wound in the sky. Through that wound poured light, the stars, and the great sun itself, known as Magnus's gift. Those who followed him became the Magna Gi, their flight marking the first constellation of the heavens. When the gods realized what they had given away, anger took hold. The Aedra gathered at the site of creation upon the new-formed world to judge Lorcan. This gathering became known as the Convention. There, Akatosh established a flow of linear time, anchoring Mundus so that cause might follow effect. It was a final safeguard against the chaos of the void. And there too, the gods condemned Lorcan for his deception. His heart, the very engine of his power, was torn from his chest by Trinimac, the champion of the Aedra. It was cast down upon the surface of Nirn, where it burned a crater into the world. The heart of Lorcan continued to beat beneath the earth, pulsing with divine rhythm. Around it, the world stabilized, tethered to mortality and permanence. In his dying act, Lorcan laughed, a sound that carried through the plains. Even undone, he had succeeded. The gods could not unmake what was made. Mundus would endure. The loss of divine presence reshaped the newborn world. Those Aedra who remained grew distant, their strength spent in creation. Mundus became a place of twilight, neither pure spirit nor full matter. It was a world of change, of mortality, and of unending cycles. Yet Arda, who stayed behind to guide its earliest forms, became known as the El-Nofe, the Earthbones. Their descendants would later shape the earliest mortal races, the Aldmer, ancestors of elves, and the men, whose origins remain clouded in mystery. As the last echoes of creation faded, the Dawn era closed. The void grew quiet. The light of Magnus's flight settled into the firmament, and time began to flow in earnest. The Orbis had given way to Nirn, the mortal world, and in its shadow, the gods who had once been infinite now lingered as constellations, memories, and whispered prayers. The stars above were once divine eyes, watching the fragile beauty of the world they had paid so dearly to create. And beneath them, the heart of Lorcan continued to beat, unseen and waiting for those who would one day uncover its secret and question again what it means to be mortal. When the light of the dawn faded, the world stood still for a breath, a fragile creation trembling under the weight of what had been sacrificed to make it real. The gods had gone silent, the stars burned where divinity once stood, and upon the face of Nirn, the first peoples began to awaken. These were called the El-Nofe, the Earthbones, remnants of the spirits who had given their essence to the forming of the world. Some remained bound to the land itself, slumbering as mountains or seas or forests. Others took shape in memory, walking upon the world as mortals. In time, these would divide into two great kindreds, the wandering El-Nofe, who would become men, and the old El-Nofe, who would become Mer, the elves. Thus began the Merethic era, the age before recorded history, when memory was myth and myth was true. Across the western seas, upon the warm and radiant islands that would come to be called Somerset, the first civilization rose, the Aldmer, or the first folk. They were tall, luminous beings, suffused with the lingering spark of divinity. They remembered the dawn as dreamers recall fragments of a fading vision. In their hearts, they still longed for the lost perfection of Aetherius, the realm from which their ancestors had fallen. The Aldmer lived by the teachings of Auriel, the Time Dragon, first among the Aedra, and they built their cities as hymns to order and memory. From the coral shores of Alinor to the golden towers of crystal-like lore, their architecture gleamed with glass and light, shaped by spells that whispered the music of the spheres. But though their civilization shone, his heart was restless. Some among them began to question their place in the mortal plane. Was Mundus a gift or a prison? Had Lorcan deceived them, or had he revealed a path to something greater? These questions would splinter Elvenkind forever. Among the Aldmer, there arose a group of visionaries led by the prophet Veloth. He preached the words of strange and luminous powers, the Daedra, those who had refused to partake in the creation of the mortal world. Veloth's followers believed that by turning from the stasis of Auriel's path, they could attain transcendence through change and struggle. And so, they departed the Somerset Isles, crossing the seas eastward toward the desolate lands that would become Resdain, later known as Morrowind. There, they took a new name, the Chima meaning changed ones. Their skin turned ashen beneath strange stars, and their eyes burned red with purpose. Yet they were not alone in these lands. Beneath the mountains and ash plains dwelt another race, the Dwemer, or Deep Elves. They were masters of craft and reason, who shunned both Aedra and Daedra. To them, divinity was an illusion, the world, a puzzle to be solved through logic and machine. Where the Chima prayed, the Dwemer built. Where the Chima saw prophecy, the Dwemer saw mathematics. Yet the two people shared a wary kingship, born of common ancestry and mirrored arrogance. In hidden halls deep beneath the Red Mountain, the Dwemer forged their secrets. Tonal architecture, machines that sang the laws of creation, and metal forms that carried thought without life. The world above saw little of their works, but the earth remembered. The sound of their forges still hums beneath the volcanic rock of Vardenfell. Moving far to the north, where winter never slept, another elven people made their home, the Snow Elves, otherwise known as Falmer. They were radiant and pale, their beauty rivaling the light of Magnus itself. They carved cities of silver and ice, singing to the auroras that dance across the skies of early Skyrim. But when men came from the frozen lands beyond the Sea of Ghosts, the balance of the north began to shift. The Snow Elves, proud and ancient, saw these newcomers as little more than beasts. Yet in time, the numbers of men grew, their tribes united under war banners, and the mountains echoed with the sound of iron and rage. This conflict would one day become legend, the Night of Tears, when the human city of Sarthor was destroyed, and the blood of both races sank into the frozen earth. It was said the elves struck first, fearing the men's discovery of a great artifact buried beneath the city, a sphere of power that would later be known as the Eye of Magnus. The humans did not forget, and from their vengeance, the age of elven dominion began to wane. While the elves built towers to honour lost divinity, the race of men struggled and endured. They came from the north, from the frozen continent of Atmora, a land of endless winter and war. There, under the banners of Ysgramor, they sailed south in longships of whalebone and frost-hardened oak, driven by vengeance for Sarthor's fall. Landing upon the northern shores, Ysgramor and his 500 companions began their war of reclamation, the Return. They burned the elven strongholds and drove the Snow Elves into darkness, where despair twisted them beyond recognition. Blind and broken, the Falmer were enslaved by the Dwemer, fed with poisonous fungi that stripped them of their sight and their will. In the endless caverns below the world, their pale beauty withered into monstrosity. The age of elves was ending, and the age of men had begun. Throughout the Merethic era, the elves raised great monuments to mirror the divine. These were not mere fortresses. They were living symbols, towers, each a reflection of the laws that held Mundus together. The Adamantine Tower upon the Isle of Belfiria, the oldest structure in existence, was built where the first gods convened to judge Lorcan. The Crystal Tower of Somerset shone as a bridge between the mortal plane and Aetherius. The Red Tower, the volcanic heart of Vardenfell, pulsed with the buried heart of Lorcan itself. And the Snow Tower, the mountain-cooled throat of the world, stood as the axis of the north, a spire of stone where time first learned to flow. Each tower was more than stone. Each was a thread in the fabric of reality, anchoring Mundus against the pull of the void. When one tower fell, the world trembled, and throughout the long millennia, the towers would rise and fall in rhythm with the fates of gods and mortals alike. As centuries passed, the great civilizations of the elves began to fade. The Dwemer turned inward, lost in their engines and experiments. The Chima's faith hardened into fanaticism, awaiting the touch of destiny. And the Aldmer, now fractured into many kindreds, the Altmer, the Bosmer, and the Orosmer, watched their unity dissolve into memory. In the north, Ysgrimar's descendants built Windhelm, the first city of men, and from its icy halls, the first true Nordic kingdom was born. The balance of Nirn had shifted forever. The divine spark of the Aedra now flickered into mortal hearts. The gods, once infinite, had become silent stars. Their children walked the world they had made, proud, fragile, and unendingly relentless. The Malefic era closed not with an ending but with a long breath, a moment between worlds when the echoes of God still lingered in the stones of forgotten towers. The dawn was gone, but its light remained, faint, golden, and waiting to be rediscovered by those who dared to remember where they came from. When the Malefic era waned, the world stood poised on the edge of awakening. The age of myths had dimmed, and in the quiet that followed, history began to take shape. From scattered tribes and ancient cities, the first mortal empires rose, and with them the long shadow of ambition. The first era began with the recording of time, year one, marked not by divine decree, but by the mortal act of remembrance. Civilization now belonged to those who could carve memory into stone. Starting in the heart of Tamriel, where jungles and rivers wound like veins of emerald light, there ruled the Aelids, or Wild Elves. They were cousins of the Aldmer, their blood still warm with starlight, and they built their realm in imitation of the gods they once worshipped. Beneath the green canopy of Cyrodiil, they raised luminous cities of glass and crystal, Ne Nilata, Kulot, Vilverin, and their radiant capital, White Gold Tower. The tower itself, older than any empire, was said to be a reflection of the divine spire of Aetherius, a bridge between mortal and godly realms. Yet, beneath this beauty lay cruelty. The Aelids ruled over tribes of men, slaves brought from the north, forced to labour in mines and temples. Their masters worshipped strange and terrible Daedra, painting their altars with blood and light. The Aelid kings believed themselves eternal, and in that arrogance they sealed their fate. Among the slaves of Cyrodiil lived a woman named Alicia, whose heart burned with both faith and defiance. She prayed not to the Aelid gods, but to the silent Aedra, the lost creators who had once walked the stars. Her prayers were answered by Akatosh, the dragon of time, and by Kinarath, the breath of the world. From their blessing she drew strength, and from her courage a rebellion was born. Men rose against their masters, the forests burned, and the crystal spires of the Aelids cracked under the weight of mortal fury. Alicia, called the Slave Queen, united the tribes of men under one banner. With her allies, the Nords from Skyrim and the Bretons of High Rock, she waged a holy war of liberation. This rebellion reached its height at the gates of the White Gold Tower. There, the last Aelid kings fell, and in the ashes of victory, Alicia was crowned Empress of Cyrodiil, founder of the first human empire, and then the mortal world changed forever. When her crown was placed upon her brow, Akatosh appeared to Alicia and formed a covenant, the first divine compact between God and mortal. He gave her the Amulet of Kings, a relic bound with his own blood and the fires of Aetherius. So long as a ruler bearing dragon blood wore the amulet and lit the dragon fires within the White Gold Tower, oblivion itself would be sealed away from the mortal plane. This pact, known as the Covenant of Akatosh, bound the Aedra to the defence of Tamriel and established a line of Dragonborn emperors. Alicia ruled with wisdom until her death. As her spirit departed, Shazar, the human name for Lorcan, the missing god, lifted her soul to the heavens, where she became Saint Alicia, guardian of men's covenant. Her bloodline would carry the right to rule. Through the centuries, would it test its strength again and again. We move over now to the rise and the fall of the Nordic Empire. In the north, the sons of Ysgramor had long since built a kingdom upon the ruins of Elven dominion, From Windhelm, the Nords spread their influence across Skyrim, conquering lands and uniting human tribes beneath the banner of the dragon cult, who worshipped Alduin, the World Eater, as divine overlord. Their power grew vast, stretching south into Cyrodiil and west towards High Rock. For a time, the Nordic Empire reigned supreme over much of Tamriel. But the arrogance of kings invited ruin. The dragon priests, consumed by tyranny, demanded worship as gods. The Nords rebelled, rising under the voice of Jurgen Windcaller, who sought to understand the true nature of the Thu'um, otherwise known as the Voice. When Alduin betrayed his followers and turned upon the world, the Nords used the Dragonren shout to cast him from the sky, imprisoning him beyond time itself. In the aftermath, the Empire fractured. The Elves reclaimed lost ground and the Nords turned inward, divided by their own legends. However, far to the west, the isles and coasts of High Rock became the stage for another transformation. The Direni clan, an ancient line of Aldmeri nobility, ruled over the region from their stronghold at Balfira, near the sacred Adamantine Tower, the oldest structure in all creation. The Direni governed both elves and men, but as the generations passed, their dominion faded. The intermingling of bloodlines gave rise to a new race, known as the Bretons, children of both Mer and Man, gifted with grace and in intellect. When the Direni fell, the Bretons inherited their lands, their ruins, and a taste for magic that would never leave them. From their rise came the first seeds of the Western Kingdoms, small, quarrelsome realms that would one day form the heart of Daggerfall and Wayrest. Over in the east, among the Chima and the Dwemer, destiny reached its breaking point. For centuries, these two peoples had lived in a way of coexistence, faith against reason, prophecy against logic, but beneath the Red Mountain, their fates were bound by a single secret, the heart of Lorcan. The Dwemer, led by High Engineer Kagranak, had discovered the heart and sought to use it to achieve Numidium, a brass god, a walking symbol of divine perfection. The Chima, led by Nerevar, saw this as heresy, a blasphemy against both God and creation. As a result, war broke out, the War of the First Council. The battle raged across Morrowind, culminating in a final confrontation beneath the mountain. When the dust settled, the Dwemer were gone, vanished utterly, their entire race erased in an instant. The heart continued to beat, but none could say what became of Kagnarak's dream. And in the silence that followed, the Chima were betrayed by their own gods. The Tribunal, Vivek, Almalexia, and Sotha-Sil harnessed the heart's power from themselves, ascending to divinity. Azura, their Daedric patron, cursed them for their betrayal, turning their golden skin to ash and their eyes to fire. Thus, the Chima became the Dunmer, the Dark Elves of Morrowind. As the centuries turned, Tamriel became a land of scattered empires and fading glory. The Alessian Order, once a force of unity, collapsed under its own fanaticism. The Nords retreated to their frozen halls, the Elves turned inward, and the once great heart of the world grew silent. Then came Riemann Cyrodiil, a man born under strange omens, said to have the soul of a dragon. He united the fractured provinces of Tamriel, forging them once more into an empire worthy of the Dragonfires. Under Riemann's rule, the borders of the empire expanded beyond imagination. The Akaviri, serpentine invaders from across the sea, were defeated, yet, impressed by his might, they swore loyalty to him. Their culture and swordsmanship would forever shape the imperial legions that followed. When Riemann died, the Dragonfires did dim. His line continued for a time, but the world he built would not endure forever. This, being known as the First Era, lasted nearly 3,000 years, a span of ages that saw gods fall, empires rise, and mortals claim their place in history. It ended not with fire, but with exhaustion. The last of Riemann's line was assassinated, the dragonfires were extinguished, and the heart of Cyrodiil fell into silence. The world entered the interregnum, an age without emperor, when the dragon amulet lay unclaimed, and oblivion stirred beyond its veil once more. But from this chaos would rise new powers, new wars, and the fragile hope of another empire. The first era was the Age of Becoming, where myth gave way to history, and mortals first learned the cost of their own freedom. The gods had retreated, but their echoes slightly lingered, and in the stones of White Gold Tower, in the ashes of the Red Mountain, and in the restless hearts of those who dreamed of an empire. Once the Riemann dynasty fell to dust, the Akaviri potentate, once loyal to the Dragonborn emperors, seized control to preserve the illusion of order. The potentate's rule, led by Versidue Shay, began with promises of peace and stability. However, in truth, it marked the beginning of one of Tamriel's longest dark ages. Versidue Shay was shrewd and calculating. He declared himself potentate and ruled in the emperor's stead, striving to bind the fracturing provinces together through diplomacy, and when that failed, through quiet cruelty. Even his iron grasp could not contain the inevitable. Rebellions festered, and the provinces began to slip away one by one. In time, he abolished standing armies of the provinces to prevent uprisings. He instituted a new order, professional soldiers and adventurers for hire, a neutral body bound by contract, rather than politics. This act would echo through the ages, for it marked the founding of two of Tamriel's greatest institutions, the Fighters Guild and the Mages Guild. The Mages Guild was born under the guidance of Vanus Galerion. Vanus was a scholar of the Sigic Order who sought to make magic accessible to all, free from the isolationist doctrines of Arteon. His rival, Manimarco, twisted the same arts towards necromancy, founding the Worm Cult, an organisation that would shadow the guild for centuries to come. For a time, Versidue Shay's reforms held. Trade resumed, banditry declined, and the remnants of the empire limped along. But peace born of fear is always going to be fragile. In 2E 324, Versidue Shay himself was assassinated, and with his death, the Akaviri potentate dissolved into memory. What followed was chaos, a time historians would later call the Interregnum. For nearly 400 years, Tamriel had no emperor, no central authority, and no unifying law. The Ruby Throne sat empty and countless warlords, kings and usurpers claimed it in turn. Every province fractured into feuding petty states, and the land choked with ambition and blood. This second era was an age of shifting powers and fleeting alliances. In Cyrodiil, the Colovian estates warred against the Nibene. In Morrowind, the great houses schemed endlessly beneath the indifferent gaze of the tribunal. In Skyrim, Jarls turned blades against one another, each claiming to be the rightful heir of Ysgramor's blood. In the Somerset Isles, the Altmer turned inward, guarding their borders from the chaos of the mainland. It was in this void of power that the new forces arose. The Three Banners War, the central conflict of the Elder Scrolls Online, began in this era. Three great alliances emerged to contest the Ruby Throne. We have the Daggerfall Covenant, a coalition of Bretons, Redguards and Orcs united under the banner of trade and stability. We have the Ebonheart Pact, an unlikely union of Nords, Dark Elves and Argonians, bound by survival against common foes. And we have the Old Marie Dominion, led by Queen Aerin of Alinor, seeking to restore elven rule and bring order to a world the younger races had broken. Beneath these wars of banners and crowns stirred a deeper threat. Manimarco and his cult, the Worm Cult, sought dominion over death itself, conspiring with the Daedric prince Molag Bal. Their unholy bargain threatened to drag Nirn into Cold Harbour, merging the mortal realm with the Daedric plane of domination. This cataclysmic event, the Plain Meld, drew the attention of heroes across Tamriel. Mortals guided by the enigmatic vestige rose to defy Molag Bor's conquest. Through their victories in Coldharbour, the Plain Meld was undone and none was spared destruction. Though the Daedric threat receded, Tamriel's wounds were deep. The alliances fractured as swiftly as they were formed. No one could claim the Ruby Throne for long, and the interregnum dragged on century after weary century. In the shadows of this chaos, a new figure rose from obscurity. A man of ambition, brilliance, and ruthless will, Tibur Septim. Known first as Talos, he was a general of unmatched skill who united the fractious Colovian warlords and led his armies to reclaim Cyrodiil. His conquest of Tamriel began in blood and ended in legend. Though diplomacy, divine favour, and the might of the Numidium, a colossal golem of Dwemer creation gifted by the tribunal of Morrowind. He brought every province under one banner once more. Thus, in 2E 896, Tibur Septim was crowned emperor, and the Second Era came to a close. The empty throne of Cyrodiil was filled again, and Tamriel stood united beneath a single empire for the first time in centuries. But unity, like all things in the Elder Scrolls, would come at a cost. The Third Era began with the coronation of Tibur Septim, the first emperor of the Septim dynasty, in the year 2E 896. His reign marked the dawn of a new age, an age of empire, divinity, and uneasy peace. The chaos of the previous era faded beneath the weight of his conquests, and for the first time in living memory, Tamriel was united. Tibur Septim's rule was mythic. To the Nords, he was Ysmir, Dragon of the North. To the Imperials, he was the restorer of the Empire. And to the later generations, he would become Talos, ascended to godhood among the Nine Divines. His victory was not achieved through strength of arms alone, but through the power of the Numidium, the brass god, a Dwemer construct capable of reshaping reality itself. With it, Tibur Septim subdued even the proud Dunmer of Morrowind, who gifted the golem to him in exchange for autonomy under the tribunal's protection. For nearly 4 centuries after Tibur's death, the Septim line endured. Each emperor bore his legacy and the burden of the dragon blood. Yet peace built on conquest is fragile. Beneath the gilded order of the empire, unrest simmered. Among the provinces, the guilds, and even the gods. The early Third Era saw prosperity and expansion. Trade flourished, and the Mages Guild rose to new prominence under Archmage Rylus and later Hannibal Traven. The Blades, remnants of the Dragon Guard, became the Emperor's sworn protectors and spies, their loyalty as unyielding as Dragonbone. The Elder Council, composed of nobles and advisors, administered the Empire's vast territories from the Ruby Throne. But the seeds of decay were already taking root. The Dunmer of Morrowind, long governed by the Tribunal Temple, began to see cracks in their faith. The Tribunal, Vivec, Almalexia, and Sotha Sil had drawn their power from the stolen heart of Lorcan, but divine theft cannot last forever. When the Neverine prophecy was fulfilled, the heart of Lorcan was destroyed, and the Tribunal's power waned. The false gods were unmade, and the Sixth House, led by the resurrected Dagoth rose in madness and ruin beneath the Red Mountain. This tale was chronicled in the Elder Scrolls III Morrowind, the story of a mortal hero who fulfilled an ancient destiny, defeated Dagoth, and freed Morrowind from both god and monster. It was a victory that marked not only the end of divine tyranny, but the beginning of Morrowind's long descent into political and spiritual turmoil. While Morrowind's fate unfolded in the east, the heart of the Empire began to falter in the Elder Scrolls IV Oblivion. Emperor Uriel Septim, the Seventh, ruled a realm beset by corruption and shadow. His assassination at the hands of the Mythic Dawn, a cult devoted to the Daedric Prince, Mehrunes Dagon shattered what remained of the Empire's stability. In the chaos that followed, the gates of oblivion burst open across Tamriel, and Dagon's legions poured into the mortal world. Cities burned and kingdoms fell, and the very skies were torn by fire. Yet from despair rose a final Septim heir, Martin Septim, a priest of Akatosh, who took up the Dragonfires and the Amulet of Kings to end the Daedric invasion. In his final act, Martin sacrificed himself, merging with Akatosh to banish Dagon and seal the veil between worlds. His death marked the end of the Septim bloodline, and with it, the end of the Third Era. The Amulet of Kings, the symbol of divine covenant between gods and mortals, was lost. The Dragonfires, long the shield that protected Nirn from oblivion, burned no more. Tamriel entered a new age, one without guidance of Dragonborn emperors, one where the gods themselves seemed silent. The Third Era closed in exhaustion. The age of the Septons had given the world centuries of order, but the fire that had united Tamriel now smouldered into ash. The Ruby Throne once more stood empty, waiting for the next claimant bold enough to seize it, or doomed enough to try. Moving into the Fourth Era, which began in the shadow of loss, we find ourselves at our lowest point. The Septon line was extinguished, the Dragonfires gone cold, and the Empire of Tamriel, once eternal, fractured beneath its own weight. The death of Martin Septon had saved the world from oblivion, but it had also severed the covenant that bound gods and mortals. What followed was an age defined by not unity, but by unravelling. Without a Dragonborn emperor, the Ruby Throne became a seat of uncertainty. The Elder Council took control, but their rule was one of compromise and weakness. The provinces, long held by loyalty or fear, began to drift away. The Thalmor, the radical faction of the Altmer Dominion, seized the moment. They rose first in the Somerset Isles, now renamed Alinor, proclaiming a rebirth of elven supremacy and denouncing the human gods as false. In Cyrodiil, civil unrest brewed. The Colovian estates turned inward, and the once glorious imperial city decayed under corruption and loss. In Blackmarsh, the Argonians, hardened by the Oblivion Crisis, closed their borders and struck back against their Dunmer oppressors, reclaiming lands long stolen. The Hist, the mysterious trees that shaped their kind, guided them into a future apart from men and Myr. In Morrowind, the cataclysm came swiftly. The eruption of Red Mountain, known as the Red Year, annihilated much of Vardenfell and laid waste to the heart of the Dunmer homeland. The tribunal was gone, the temple shattered, and the Dunmer people were scattered. The proud city of Vivec fell into the sea, and the remnants of the Dark Elves fled to Solstheim, a cold refuge granted by the Nords. Meanwhile, the Thalmor extended their reach. Through political cunning and military might, they established the Aldemiri Dominion, absorbing Valenwood and elsewhere. The Empire, weakened and weary, could not resist, and decades later, under Emperor Titus Mede II, the Dominion's ambitions would ignite the Great War. This war was cataclysmic and would engulf the heart of Tamriel. The Thalmor struck first, demanding the Empire abolish the worship of Talos, now venerated as the Ninth Divine. When the Empire refused, Alinor's armies descended upon Cyrodiil. The sacking of the Imperial City was brutal beyond words. The White Gold Tower burned, its banners torn down and its streets red with the blood of innocents. Titus Mede II retreated to Skyrim, where he rallied his remaining legions and struck back in a desperate counter-offensive known as the Battle of the Red Ring. Though the Empire retook the city, victory came at a terrible price. The subsequent White Cold Concordat, a peace treaty with the Dominion, outlawed Talos worship and placed the Thalmor's agents throughout the Empire, It was peace in name only, a quiet surrender dressed in diplomacy. The Empire was left broken, spiritually and politically. In Skyrim, this betrayal kindled rebellion. The Stormcloak Uprising, led by Ulfric Stormcloak, sought to restore Nord independence and the right to worship Talos. Civil war split the province in two, with the Empire fighting its own subjects, while Thalmor agents watched from the shadows, smiling. It was in this fractured age that the impossible occurred. The dragons returned. The World Eater, Alduin, the eldest of Akatosh's children, emerged from the ruins of time, heralding the end foretold in the Elder Scrolls. Skyrim became the centre of prophecy once more. Amid the fire and ruin rose the last Dragonborn, a mortal with the soul of a dragon, destined to stand against Alduin and preserve the world from its cyclical doom. This was the story chronicled in the Elder Scrolls V Skyrim, a tale of rebirth and return. The Dragonborn mastered the ancient Thu'um, the voice of the gods, and faced Alduin atop the throat of the world. In doing so, they fulfilled a prophecy as old as creation itself, and yet, even in victory, could not halt the deeper decay of the world. For while Alduin's death saved the present, it did not restore what was lost. The Empire continued to fade. The Thalmor's influence continued to grow, their golden banners casting long shadows over every court and province. Morrowind remained scarred, Hammerfell stood defiant but alone, and Skyrim, divided by pride and faith, drifted towards isolation. The Fourth Era is often described by historians as an age of aftermath, a time when mortals live among the ruins of greater ages. The gods are silent, the scrolls are restless, and the wheel of history turns with uncertain rhythm. Yet the Elder Scrolls themselves still whisper of what is to come, and somewhere beyond the edges of known history, a new prophecy begins to stir. The Elder Scrolls do not tell the future, they reveal all futures, woven, intersecting, and infinite. Each age of Tamriel begins with fire and ends in shadow. Empires rise, gods fall, and the mortals stumble through myth as if it were history. The scrolls record it all, indifferent to glory or despair. What comes after the Fourth Era is unknown. The Elder Scrolls VI, as the seers might one day call it, remains unwritten. But its seeds lie here in the ashes of the Empire and the lingering defiance of humankind. Perhaps in the west, beyond the mountains of Hammerfell, a new destiny waits to be uncovered. Or perhaps the world will turn again towards gods and dragons, towards a cycle that never truly ends. For Tamriel is eternal, in the stories that bind its countless souls to the will of creation. And so the unbroken thread of the Elder Scrolls continues, unfolding still, into the dawn of whatever world comes next.